faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible.
We love our intro video, but we just thought you needed to hear Johnny Cash read Hebrews 11 to you as we kick off a brand new series here at Metro called Iconic. This is the second ever series here at Metro, and we're excited for it because we really want to take a step together and we want to learn what does it look like to have faith enough to follow. You see, in the Christian life, just to set all of this up for you, in the Christian life, we're meant to have a type of faith, a quality of faith that is pretty distinct against the backdrop of the rest of the world. Like faith, it's a common characteristic. It's something that all of us have talked about or heard of at some point. And yet, what we want to do is we want to look into the Bible, specifically Hebrews chapter 11, which is where we're going to be working over the course of the next several weeks. And we want to ask God, what does faith look like? What does it look like to live by faith? And so, we're going to be diving off into this series called Iconic. Why call it iconic? Like, why is that the title that we chose? Because for something to be iconic means that it's symbolic of an icon. That every one of us, the way we live our life, the faith that we express, we're meant to ultimately draw the attention of other people, not so that it can end on us, but so that we can take it and we can push it, we can point it towards Jesus. That's the idea. That people would look at our lives as we live in faith and they would say, that's amazing. Like, how is that happening? And we could take no credit. But we could say we walk, we live, we move by faith. And as we do, God meets us there. And the amazing, it happens. And so Hebrews 11, we're going to be walking through it. And what you need to know about Hebrews 11, if you've never read it, is it's called the Hall of Faith. And so what you find is you find a bunch of heroes of the faith in the chapter. It walks through, over the course of 40 verses, a variety of different characters. And we're going to be walking through those people. We're going to do a character study on the different men and the women of Hebrews 11. And yet, before we dive off into it, we need to do ourselves the favor of answering the question, what is faith? Like, what is it? That seems like a silly question. Seems pretty commonplace, right? Everybody's heard of it. So what exactly do we mean when we say it? And yet, we don't want to have an incorrect idea. We don't want to be mistaken about what faith actually is. You see, if we don't know what it is rightly, if we can't define it properly, then we're at risk of mistakenly behaving in a way that's inconsistent with what faith would normally entail. Get it? So, let me unpack it like this. It's like in dating. We sort of chuckle to ourselves today at the thought of defining the relationship. Right? DTRs. That's so 2010. Like, that's something that we used to do in college. We don't really do that anymore. And yet, what we know about defining the relationship is it's still an important thing to do. Like, it's still a helpful thing for us to actually participate in. Why? Because where there is a lack of definition in a relationship, there is an abundance of confusion in a relationship, right? If you don't know what to expect in a relationship, then you don't know how to express yourself in a relationship. To put it most simply, this is why people say some things and yet they do other things instead, right? If you don't define, then you can't be consistent. It's kind of like people that will look at one another and say, I'm not really looking to date, but yeah, let's grab dinner a couple times this week. That'd be amazing. Hold on, well, that feels inconsistent with what you just said. Or, you're not really my type, but you're really awesome. And I just love talking to you. Why is it important for us to define relationships? Because it mitigates confusion. Like, it helps us to conduct ourselves in a way that helps us to know, hey, if we're friends, let's be friends. If we're interested in one another, then let's get to know one another better. If we're actually dating, then let's move towards marriage, because that's what defined relationships are meant to do, right? There's clear definition, and as a result, there's no room for confusion. Definition prevents confusion. And the same is true with our faith, right? So we have to define it, because if we don't properly define faith, then we will mistakenly apply faith in our life. So what is it? What's faith? Well, I'm glad you asked. Hebrews 11, if you got a Bible, you can go and grab it. You can turn to Hebrews chapter 11. And as you're moving there, we'll have the text on the screen too if you didn't bring a Bible. But what you'll find in Hebrews 11 is Hebrews 11 is like it's the hallmark chapter in all of the Bible on the topic of faith. In 40 verses, faith is referenced 24 different times. It's the only chapter in the entire Bible where faith is actually defined, where we actually get a definition for what it is. And yet, even though Hebrews 11 has a definition of faith, it's not just about a definition. Like, it gives 2 verses to defining faith. And then he gives 38 to demonstrating what faith actually looks like. And so here it is, Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to look at verses just 1 and 2 tonight, just 2 verses. This is what it says. Now, faith is the reality of what is hoped for. It's the proof of what's not seen. For by this, our ancestors were approved. So what is faith? Like, if we ask that question to one another today, what we would find is we would get, sure, a range of different answers, but mostly what we would hear is people describing faith as some sort of religious conception that they've adopted, right? Like, it's their conception of spiritual realities. It's their understanding of different religious spheres or realities. That's the idea. Like, when you walk up to someone, you don't look at them and say, hey, what religion do you ascribe to? Nobody says that. What do we say instead? Hey, what's your faith? Because that feels so much more approachable. It feels so much more kind and friendly. And when we ask that question, when we approach someone and we say, hey, what's your faith? We show our hand. Like, when we ask that question, it implies what we think about faith in specific, that we think faith it's a mental activity. What's your faith? What do you think about God? What do you believe about Jesus? And you see, what we're going to find as we unpack this chapter, specifically these 2 verses, is we'll find that idea, this mental activity, right? This thought about what do we do with God? What is our faith? That idea, it's not inherently wrong, it's just not entirely right, which begs the question, what's missing? Like, when we think about faith, if we know, okay, there's an element of what I think, but it's more than that, then what is actually amiss? So let's look at it. It's right here in these 2 verses. It says first that faith is the reality of what's hoped for. The reality of what's hoped for. If you have a different translation in here, I'm reading specifically from the CSB, but if you have an NIV or an ESV, what you're going to find is you may have a different word there. Instead of reality, you may have something like faith is the assurance, or faith is the confidence of things hoped for. It's the conviction. Where mine says proof, conviction, or the evidence of things unseen. So why all of the differences? Like, when we're reading through the Bible and we start to see differences like this, it shouldn't freak us out. But we need to understand why they're there. Well, Bible translation is a hard job. No 2 languages match each other perfectly. Like, we're trying to translate Greek into English. And what we have here, these 2 words, they're packed full of deep, rich Greek meaning. And yet in English, we can't really fully encapsulate what the author means here. And so what we need to do before we jump off into the rest of this is I have to do a word study with you, which this isn't, maybe it's not fun for you. It's really fun for me. I love word studies. And here's what we know, is that the word for assurance or reality in the first part of verse 1, it's the Greek word upostasis, which actually means in Greek to stand under, to stand underneath, specifically a guaranteed agreement. Like, that's what that word means. Assurance, confidence, what it means is it means to stand under a guaranteed agreement. So to illustrate this in a way that will help us, it would be like your vehicle, your car, whatever it is, whatever you own, you have the title to that car. By way of having a title to your vehicle, you are legally entitled to possess that piece of property. Does that make sense? Like, you own the deed. You have the title. That's what this word means, is that you can enjoy the promise of everything your car offers, that you can enjoy quick and easy transportation across a giant and vast city, that you can enjoy air conditioning in what is going to be a hot Houston summer. Like, you get to enjoy all the benefits of that property because it's yours. You own the title to it. It is a guaranteed, legally binding agreement that if ever there was a dispute, you could bring and you could say, hey, this is actually mine. I have possession of this. I own this. I don't merely think it's mine. I know it is. I know it is. It's objectively true. It's a reality, which is why I chose to read from the CSB. I think the word reality gets close to it. And the word for conviction or proof in the second half of verse 1, it's the word alenkos in Greek, alenkos. What does that mean? Alenkos simply means evidence. Evidence. What's evidence good for? Like when a judge steps forward and he needs to convict or she needs to convict someone of a crime, evidence is pretty useful, yeah? Because it's objectively true. Like a conviction can be rendered by a judge when evidence is in hand. And so what we know is that evidence or proof, it's objectively true, right? There's no denying it. It's objectively true. So why do we go to the trouble of explaining all of that? For this reason. Faith is not just a mentality that we are meant to adopt. It is a reality that we are meant to experience. It's not just a mentality. It's a reality that we're meant to experience. The first thing we learn about faith, it's this, that it's more than just subjective thoughts or feelings about God. It's an objective encounter, a reality, an experience with God. That's what faith actually is. It's the difference in being confident and being convinced about something. Confident versus convinced. So my uncle, he taught me this. For 3 summers when I was in college, I coached volleyball. He owns a volleyball club up in Dallas, so I was living with him. This guy has more swagger than anybody I know. And he told me, he was like, listen, there's a difference between being confident and being convinced. Confidence, it looks to the future. Convinced looks from the future. You get what I mean? Like, here's the idea, that confidence is, I think this will happen. To be convinced is, I know this will happen. Friends, faith, it doesn't just believe confidently about God. It behaves convincingly about God. You get that? Like, it's not just belief, it's behavior. It's a reality. It's an experience, and it's convinced. It knows what's true. So, not to brag, but when my wife and I first started dating, I kind of knew what I was doing, man. Like, I walked into that relationship, and I knew all of the right things to say, all of the right things to do. I looked every bit the part of a guy worth dating as far as following the rule book, right? I knew that clarity was important in our relationship, that I wasn't just supposed to ask her to hang out, that I was actually supposed to use the word date. Hey, can we go on a date? Clarity was really important. I knew that purity was a priority in our relationship, and so I was needing to make parameters, set parameters, boundaries to protect us from temptation of any kind. I knew that in order for our relationship to thrive, I didn't need to just invest in quantity of time, I needed to invest in quality of time. I knew how to play the game. I knew all the right things to do. And yet, though I had great vision and I had great intentions, as I stepped into our relationship, if you asked my wife to grade my leadership, my pursuit of her in our dating relationship, I would make anything but straight A's. Because she would tell you that, man, he knew everything that he was supposed to do. He had great intentions, and yet he was absent of any real follow-through. You see, my dating mentality was right, but my dating reality was wrong. I knew what to do, I just failed to do it. Real talk, how many of us could say the same thing about our faith? Like, how many of us, if we did a hard, honest assessment, we looked at our walk with the Lord, could actually say the same thing, that, man, my faith mentality, it's strong. But my faith reality, it's never actually been weaker. Like, if we're really honest, how many of us would find that is the response that we have the best of intentions, but we have a failure to take action on what we actually claim to be true? Listen, you cannot be a faithful believer without faithful behavior. You can't be a faithful believer without faithful behavior. And I'm not talking about, hey, like, go and be a good guy or good girl. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. Like, listen, your life, it should bear the fruits of the Spirit. You should try to honor and keep the statutes and commands of the Lord. All of those things are good and true. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, hey, faithful believers and faithful behavior. Faithful behavior looks like believing on God for everything he deserves to be believed in. Like, it's being willing to live, act, speak, move, stand in light of what you know to be true of God. Like, it's more than intellectual assent. Faith is more than intellectual assent, and yet we treat it like that sometimes. The Pharisees did that. The religious elite in Jesus' day, they knew all the things about God, and yet they didn't know him when he was standing right in front of them. That's not faith. And yet so many of us, we treat it that way. I was right in this camp. You see, if you read the Gospels, what you find, the Gospels, it's the story of Jesus' life, his ministry on earth. What you find as Jesus moves through his ministry is he never comes to anybody and asks, like, hey, what is your faith? Hey, what's your faith? He always asks, where? Where is your faith? Not what is it? Like, he doesn't need to hear you say it. Where is it? He needs to see it. It needs to be observable because it's a reality. Mark 2, 3-5, it says this, and they came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. And when they could not get near him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him. And when they had made an opening, they let down the bed on which the paralytic lay. And when Jesus saw their faith, he saw their faith. He says, son, your sins are forgiven. Why does Jesus respond? It's not because they scraped through the roof and then they lowered their friend, and as he came down to Jesus, Jesus was like, hey, what do you think of me? Everything that they thought of Jesus, it was on clear display. You wouldn't go through those types of steps to get to Jesus if you didn't have true, real, bold faith. Matthew 8:10. This is the story of Jesus and the centurion. It says, when Jesus heard this, the centurion, he marveled and he said to those who followed him, the centurion needed Jesus to heal his servant. And yet he looks at Jesus and he's like, you don't need to come. It's a long journey for you. I know you, like me, have authority, and with but a word you can say, be well, and he will be. Jesus says, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Have I found such faith? What do you do when you find it? You see it. You discover it. You have to find it. You have to lay eyes on it. You have to observe it. The last one, Mark 5. I love this. The bleeding woman, she had heard the reports about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd, and she touched his garment, for she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. That is a bold, faithful statement. All I need is to touch his garments. He doesn't even need to talk to me. If I can just touch his garments, I'll be made well. And immediately the flow of blood, it dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Jumped down to 32. And he looked around to see who had done it, because he felt the power leave from him. And so he looks around to see who touched me. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Your faith, your willingness to go the distance, to take a stand, to make a move, it has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Listen, these people, they did not engage the world by way of what they saw. They engaged the world with how it should be seen. Not according to what they saw, but according to how it should actually be seen. Do you get what I mean by that their lives, they were not dictated by the circumstances of this world? That I'm a bleeding woman and I've had a bleeding discharge for 15 years, that I'm a cripple and I've been crippled my entire life, or that I'm sick and ill and lame and I actually don't know if I'll ever get better. They were not, their view of the world, it was not dictated according to the circumstances around them, but the evidences of another world. They had evidence because they had seen Jesus. They had seen him do things the likes of which no one could explain. Colossians 1:16, it says, for by him talking about Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. That's two different worlds, two different realities. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle, it's not against flesh and blood. It's not against what's here and now, but it's against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil and spiritual forces in the heavens. Can I just level with you for a second? Like, the natural world is a supernatural world. You get that? Like, I'm not trying to stand up here and be charismatic. I don't normally ascribe to that identification. I just want to be honest with you. Like, the Bible, it's riddled with this reality that there are two different realms at play, that there is a terrestrial world, what's going on the earth, and there's a celestial realm, that there's something going on in the heavens. This is the world. This is the world in which we live, and we would do well to know that this is what we're a part of, and that God has given us faith so we know how to move through it, how to navigate through the world. It's like in some of our most beloved stories. Like Luke Skywalker, he sits with Obi-Wan, and what's he do? He learns about this thing called the Force. Or Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I just watched the newest movie. He learned about the multiverse. Like, oh my gosh, like it's not just this world, it's other worlds. Like he learned all of that from Doctor Strange. Or you see that Morpheus, he sits there with a red pill and a blue pill in hand, and he unpacks the idea of the Matrix. True reality to Neo, that what you've been living in, it's a facade, that there's another reality. We see the boys from Stranger Things. Anybody excited about season 4? I am. We see those guys. They encounter the upside down for the very first time. They learn about it from their physics teacher. Or Hagrid. He asks Harry, "Blimey, Harry, didn't you ever wonder what your parents learned at all?" Learned what? You're a wizard, Harry. In that moment, like he learned, the world is not as I thought. The world is different. It's more sophisticated. It's more complex. And I have to learn how to navigate through it. Listen to me, Metro. Consider me your friendly Hagrid. You're not a wizard. You're a believer. You're a believer. And believers, they live by faith. They live by faith. How do we do it? Let's look at verses 1 and 2 again. It says, now faith is the reality of what is hoped for. It's the proof of what is not seen. And then it says in verse 2, for by this our ancestors were approved. Our ancestors were approved. That word in Greek, it's the word martyreo, which simply means to witness or testify. So when it says our ancestors were approved, it's not that God looked at them and he was like, hey, good job, guys. Approval, it's for you. He didn't give them a pat on the butt and an attaboy. Like, that's not what it was. It wasn't just simply approval. Martyreo, that word means to witness or testify, that their lives, the faith with which they lived, it witnessed, it testified to the reality, that they genuinely believed in God, that they believed who God was, that he would do what he said he would, and that ultimately he is who he says he is. They believed it. And so they lived like it. Like their lives, their very lives, verified that the world was as God had told them. And so their faith, it was testified to them, witnessed to them. You see, these heroes, we call them heroes of the faith. Heroes of the faith. But they got the idea right. Well, they did. But they're more than heroes of the faith. They are heroes of faith. Like they grasped the reality and they stepped in completely to experience it. They took God at his word and their lives were forever changed because of it. Romans 10:17, it says, so faith, it comes from what is heard. And what is heard comes through the message about Christ the Messiah. How do you live by faith? How do you live by faith? We've talked about what it is. How do you live by it? You orbit, your whole life, your whole being, your entire existence around what God has said about his plans to seek and save the lost, to purchase out of a broken and bruised world those whom he loves by the blood and the body of his own son. You believe him for it. You trust what he said. You see, you orbit your life around Jesus. You get your eyes on Jesus. Because if you can get your eyes on Jesus, then you can see him rightly. And when you see him rightly, you will see everything else rightly as a result. And as you see everything else, you'll actually know how to live rightly. That's what faith is. You see, what we know is that the outcome of your faith, it depends on the object of your faith. This is lesson 2. There's only 2 lessons on faith tonight. Lesson 2, the outcome of your faith, it depends on the object of your faith. What is true of your faith depends on what you see with your faith. To put it a different way, what you see is what you get. Like what you see is what you get. If you see Jesus, you'll get a faith that's informed by Jesus. If you see your circumstances, you will get a faith that is informed by your circumstances in life. To illustrate it, 2 Kings chapter 6. I love this story. It's a story about the king of Syria. He is squaring off against Israel, and what you find is that he is trying to capture Elisha. And it says this, when the servant of the man of God is Elisha, he has a servant in the story. When his servant rose early in the morning and he went outside, behold, an army with horses and chariots was all around the city. And the servant said, "Alas, my master, what shall we do?" Elisha said, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And then Elisha, you see, he realizes there's a discrepancy between what I'm seeing and what my guy is seeing. And so he prays this, "O Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." And so the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around them. What you see is what you get. What did the servant see? He saw his circumstances. And so what did he get? Fear. Tons of fear. And yet in contrast, Elisha, what does Elisha see? He sees the Lord. And because he sees God, he gets deliverance. You see, the object of Elisha's faith is God. You see, Elisha, he's not just confident that God is with him, he's convinced that God is with him. Like he knows. He says, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." He does not lack certainty in the face of his adversity. Like there is no uncertainty. He doesn't start to freak out even though things start to look tough. Instead, he sees God. He knows the outcome of his faith because he depends on the object of his faith. Listen, we have to get this. For the entire world, for the whole world, seeing is believing. But for the Christian, believing is seeing. For the Christian, believing is seeing. Like Paul says it himself, that we don't walk by sight, we walk by what? Faith. Yeah, say it a little bit louder. Like we walk by faith, not by sight. Those are the words of Paul. He called it. He called his shot. Now it's important. We have to debunk a couple of myths about this. Like there are some people that have taken this idea that believing is seeing and they've hijacked it. Like they've taken it and they've distorted it to kind of push their own agendas. And so let's work through a couple of myths. Myth number 1, believing is seeing, is what many proponents of the prosperity gospel have adopted. And I'm not going to make this about the prosperity gospel. I don't need to stand up here and tell you about health and wealth and why it's wrong. They have hijacked this because they want you to think that if you can believe it, God will give it. Like, hey, if you believe it, God will give it to you, it's yours. That's not true. That's not even what we believe as Christians. Like, that's not right. We don't follow Jesus to get what we want. We follow Jesus to get what he wants. We follow Jesus to get what he wants. Like, Jesus, he's not Santa Claus. And that sounds silly. But like, we treat him like that. Like sometimes we look at him and we're like, oh, like Santa, like I'm going to be a good little kid and I'm going to make sure that I conduct myself accordingly so that I can get everything that I want from you under the tree come Christmas morning. Like that's how we treat him sometimes. That's what the prosperity gospel is advancing. That's what they're advocating. And yet that is not true. Like that would be manipulative. We follow Jesus to get what he wants. That's what the life of the believer is characterized by. We believe boldly, daringly, trusting in God for all that he intends to accomplish, not just in the world, but through our lives. Like we trust him in it. And what we find is that as we do it, we trust him to move in extraordinary ways. What ends up happening is he gets glory and we get joy. Like he gets glory and we get joy. It says in Psalm 37:4, famous verse, delight yourself in the Lord, in Yahweh, and he will give you the desires of your heart. That sounds great, right? Well, let's understand. If your delight is in God, then what is your desire for? God. And yet he's saying, hey, like I'm not just trying to manipulate you into giving me what I want. If you will delight yourself in me, you'll be delighted. Like you're going to get joy. And I'm actually going to answer your prayers. I'm actually going to help you. It's a win-win. The second myth that people often believe is that Christian faith is an uninformed faith. That Christian faith is an uninformed faith. Like this whole thing about Christianity. Like we sure it's not just wishful thinking? Are you sure it's not just kind of a weak-minded religiosity that people have ascribed towards? Because, they're just fearful of what comes after death. Like they're fearful of what happens in eternity. Is that myth true? No. The early church, they proved to us that Christianity is a faith of fact. It's a faith of fact. That we don't just foolishly follow or blindly believe. That's not the way that we conduct ourselves. I wish we had time to really dive into this. What we know in the scriptures is that when Jesus rose, in this book, like just so you know, Hebrews, it was written in AD 67 to AD 69. When Jesus rose, somewhere AD 30 to 35, what we find about Jesus is that he resurrected from the dead and then he appeared to over 500 people, men and women both. And the reason he did it is because eyewitness testimony is the most powerful evidence to something that did occur. And so what we know is that when the author of Hebrews begins to write this account, their thought is like, hey, if you have any questions, go ask one of them. They're still living. Like, go talk to someone. They can tell you about the account of what they saw. We have eyewitnesses to it. Let me illustrate it like this. There's roughly 500 of us in here, roughly. You can be my eyewitnesses. My friend Ryan, I don't even know if he's done it yet. He is going to walk out and he's going to put a chair somewhere behind me. There are no screens in the back of the room. I can't see where this chair is placed. I have no idea, according to my own discretion, with any kind of certainty as to where this thing is. I won't look at the prompters behind me. I will look at you. How do I find it? How do I believe that it's there? Well, I need your help. So hot, cold, right? Let me know. We hot? No? Okay, listen, hold on. We got to be honest. We got to be truthful here, okay? And the nice thing is, you are all my witnesses, but I know which ones of you are trustworthy and not. So, in worst case, I got my wife in the front. So I've rigged the system a little bit here, but no, help me. Hot or cold? Cold? Okay, all right. Hot. This is hot. Yeah? I'm literally y'all tell me when to sit, man. I have no idea. And listen, can I just be real? If I busted up here, gospel's next, this is a bad moment, all right? We there? Oh my gosh. Can I sit? Oh gosh, I'm so nervous. Squat! No, it's not there. Where is it? Hey, round of applause for yourselves. Thank you so much. Hey, real talk. Some of you in the room, you think you have a weak faith because you have doubts, you have questions about all of this. You don't have a weak faith. To question is to have a seeking faith. You want to know. You want answers. Like, I'm not inviting you into blind belief. I'm not asking you to foolishly follow. Like, what's amazing about God, as is similar to that chair, is others can help you find him. Even when he feels impossible to find, others can guide you to him. There is credibility in the scriptures to support that this isn't corrupt. The Bible's it's not broken. It can support its claims. And just like that chair, the amazing thing about God is he can bear your weight. He can hold you up. He can give you rest. He can keep you high. Like, this is what we know is true of God. God is not afraid of your questions. And so if you're here, and honestly, some of you, you've ascribed to faith, you've ascribed to belief, and yet you honestly need to do some wrestling yourselves. Like, it would be intellectually lazy to listen to the thoughts or sermon or blog of one or two people and take that as your belief. You should do the work. You totally should. We'd love to help you. If you're questioning, don't take that as a sign of weak faith. That is seeking faith. And great faith can spring forth from wrestling in tough places. Friends, if we want to live by faith, like if we want to taste the reality, what Hebrews 11:1 is saying, the reality of what's to come in Jesus, what we're hoping for ahead. Right now, we want to taste it right now, here in the present. If we want to taste of that, then listen, you have to be willing to set your eyes on Jesus and set your feet to following him. You can't just see him. You can't just look at him. You have to go after him. You have to follow him along. Like, that's what faith actually looks like. Like, listen, when you move in faith, when you pray boldly, when you take big steps of trust, when you ask God for the impossible, like when you actually dare to face the public ridicule of other people, when you start to do things that bold faith would actually require, God will meet you in those places. Will he give you what you want every time? No. No, God's not going to give you what you want always. And yet we have this promise that God, he works for our good. He does it for those that he loves, that have been called according to his purposes. He works for our good. That verse is written specifically for people that are in suffering. Like people where it's like, gosh, nothing has gone right. And God's like, I'm at work. I'm doing something good. Trust me. Friends, when it feels for us like things could not be at a worse spot, when it feels as if God could not be further away, as if he has forgotten what it is we're dealing with, as if you've prayed and you've offered up requests and it's as if it keeps falling on deaf ears, you can hold fast to the promise that he is working for your good, that he has not forgotten your needs, that he is trustworthy, not just to know what's best, but he is kind to do what's best. He wants to do what's best for you. He wants to do what's best for me. That type of promise, and that is but one. The Bible's riddled with them. That type of promise, it prompts great faith. It bids the question, why wouldn't you walk in this way? Is God going to fail his promises? Is he going to drop the ball? No. Like, he wouldn't be God if he did. He'd be faithless. He'd be inconsistent. He has never failed his promises. And so if you hold him to it, even when things are hard, when you hold him to his promises, the burden of responsibility, it's on him. I don't want the burden of responsibility to be on anyone else. There's no better place, there's no safer spot for me to trust than God in his promises. Listen, Metro, God, when you pray, he will provide the power, but your faith, it provides the potential. Like God, he will provide the power. Your faith provides the potential. The question is, will you bring him your faith? Will you do it? Like, will you pray prayers that are so big enough that only God can actually answer them? Like, would you pray prayers that are actually worthy of him? Not just like, can you get me to work safely? He's like, you can do that on your own. No, would you pray prayers that are so big that he has to step in? The impossible prayer. Nothing's impossible for our God. Like, will you live with the kind of courage that never underestimates him? Like, you're never going to get to heaven and he's going to look at you and be like, you overestimated me. You thought I'd show up and that was just too much for me to do. No, like live with that kind of courage. Can we do it? Like, will you take risks, trust in his promises, those guarantees that he has given you that we know he will not fail? Like, will we trust in those things and live with the kind of trust that supports our words by our actions? Like, can we do it? Like, friends, God provides the power. Your faith provides the potential. It provides the potential. Where do you need God's power in your life? Where do you need him to show up? What do you need him to do? Addiction? Porn, drugs, alcohol, food? Do you just feel like so defeated in it? Like, man, there's no way out. Like, I've tried. I've confessed to others, I've asked for accountability, I got covenant eyes, like whatever, but it just doesn't feel like I'm ever going to be free of this addiction. I feel defeated. God, do you have power enough to meet me in that place? Yeah, I do. I've got power for that. And do you have the faith to meet me there? Is it disease? There's something in your life, sickness, illness, your life, your family's life, that's just left you hopeless. You've seen doctors, you've gone to treatment, you've tried different medications, and it just, nothing seems to work. God, do you have power to help me in the helpless place? Yeah, I do. I do. Do you have the faith to meet me there? Relationships. I know we've talked about this, we've joked about this, but honestly, loneliness is a real fear for a lot of people. And some of you feel hopeless in the face of your relationship status. Feels like the years, they're just whisking away, they're just passing day by day, and it only feels as if that dream is getting further and further and further away. Can God help me in that place? God, do you have power to solve that problem? I do. Will you have the faith to meet me in that place? Some of you are questioning whether or not God would save you. Salvation. God, you don't know what I've done. You don't know what I've thought. You don't know the places I've been. I've done so many things that are wrong. How could you ever step in and actually heal me of those things? How could you ever actually forgive me of those things? You don't have that kind of power. No one can actually free me of the stuff that I've been a part of. My sin's too great. My shame's too heavy. My guilt's too widespread. How could you actually step in and help me in that spot? God is saying, I have the power to do it. Hebrews 12, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, all of those in Hebrews 11, whom we will study in the weeks to come, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Let us look to Jesus. Get your eyes on him. He's the author, perfecter. He's the beginning and the end of your faith. And for those of you that feel too far gone, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, your cross. He despised its shame, your shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. He has gone before you, and he has prepared a place for you. Jesus, do you have the power to save me? I do. Do you have the faith that I am offering you to meet me in that place? Friends, the question is not whether or not God will come to meet us in those places. It's, do we have the faith to meet him there ourselves? do we have the faith to meet him there ourselves? Let me pray for us. God, I don't know what people in this room are living through, God, what they have endured, Lord. I don't know what they're coming from. I don't know what they're going into. But I know, God, you have the power to help. That, God, you provide the power. Our faith, it provides the potential. God, every single person in here that has confessed belief in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of their sins, that has called on the lordship of Jesus, their life is meant for so much more. The key to unlocking all of that potential, God, it is their faith. Jesus, let us be a people that don't just know the what's of faith, but actually could stand to go the places that faith would lead. We don't want to just think the right things. We want to do the right things. We want to live the right way. We want to follow with the kind of boldness and courage and like daring character, God, that you deserve. So would you help us, God, to have that? Friends, if you're here and you're like, man, I don't know that I have that kind of faith. Like there's a prayer of a father in the Gospels that says, I believe, help my unbelief, Jesus. Like Jesus responds to whatever faith you offer him, whether it is big or it is small, bring it to him. And if you're here and you're like, man, like I feel this impulse, like I need to get up and I need to raise my hands, or I need to sit low and I need to pray to God, or I need to come down to the prayer rail and I need to just meet the Lord. Listen, nothing is more honoring to God than you actually stepping in faith, moving on it. Like don't sit still, stand up, go for it. Like that's what faith requires. That's what it commands. And some of you just need to call on him and place your faith in him tonight. Friends, we're going to move into a time of worship. And I just want you to have the space to do with these next few moments whatever you need to do with them. Faith, it demands a response. It prompts a reply. That doesn't mean you have to stand up and sing. It doesn't mean you have to come down and pray with our care team, though they would love to, our prayer team. It may mean that you need to sit still, that you need to try and discern the voice of the Spirit. It may mean that. What faith will not prompt, and I promise you this, it will not prompt you do nothing. It will not prompt you just move on. It will not prompt you just listen and process and keep going into whatever is next. That's not what faith would do. Friends, he responds to the faith we offer. Will you bring him your faith right now? Jesus, we love you. You are the author, perfecter of our faith. And we respond to you now with the faith that you have given. It is in your name we pray.